All right, good afternoon. Today we are continuing with point 5 of chapter 2, the expedient means of the record of the orally transmitted teachings by Nichiren, who conveyed it to Nico, shown in Nikko. So the last time we ended up leaving off at the end of point 4. Point 5 starts at the top of page 34 right here where I have this mark. So let's get after it. Point 5, regarding the passage, there are monks and nuns who behave with overbearing arrogance, laymen full of self-esteem, lay women who are lacking in faith. Among the 4 kinds of believers, the likes of these number 5,000. They fail to see their own errors, are heedless and remiss with regard to the precepts, because they assume they know what's important and what isn't. Clinging to their shortcomings, unwilling to change, because they're already satisfied with where they are along the path. All right? But these persons of small wisdom have already left. The chaff among this assembly has departed in the face of the Buddha's authority. These persons were of paltry merit and virtue, incapable of receiving the law. This assembly is now free of branches and leaves, made up only of those steadfast and truthful. So Tentai's input on this from Words and Phrases, Volume 4 says, overbearing arrogance, self-esteem, and lack of faith are faults common to all 4 kinds of believers. So they're faults common to everyone. All right, no one was left out in that 4 kinds of believers. But the 2 types of believers, practitioners, male and female practitioners, and then female monks and nuns, female nuns. Okay, so Words and Phrases, Volume 4 says, overbearing arrogance, self-esteem, and lack of faith are false common to all 4 kinds of believers. But the 2 types of believers who have left the household life, the monks and nuns, because they have devoted much practice to the way, have gained proficiency in meditation. Okay, they've gained proficiency in meditation that the other people that hadn't taken up religious life may not have achieved. But they often mistakenly believe that they have attained the goal of enlightenment and are therefore particularly given to overbearing arrogance. In other words, there's nothing that I don't already know. Okay? These 2 types of believers who remain in ordinary life, the 2 types of believers who remain in ordinary life, the laymen and laywomen, are often puffed up with pride and frequently display self-esteem. Women, being shallow in wisdom, often fall into mistaken views. The words they fail to see their own errors refer to all 3 errors of the mind, overbearing arrogance, self-esteem, and lack of faith. So the words they fail to see their own errors refers to all 3 errors of the mind, overbearing arrogance, self-esteem, and lack of faith. Because these people conceal their failings, flaunt their virtues, and are incapable of self-reflection, they show themselves to be persons of no shame. If they could see their own errors, they would be monks with a sense of shame. On the Words and Phrases, so this would be now Myolo, Volume 4, says, the words, because these people conceal their failings, refer to the 3 errors of overbearing arrogance, self-esteem, and lack of faith. Because these people conceal their failings, flaunt their virtues, refers to overbearing arrogance. Incapable of self-reflection refers to self-esteem. Persons of no shame refers to a lack of faith. But if a person is capable of seeing his own errors, then he is without these 3 errors. Although he has not yet reached the goal of enlightenment, he can still be called a person with a sense of shame. Okay, so this is all about thinking you've gotten there before you've gotten there. I made the same mistake. So it's very possible to occur, but you must continue on the path towards an ever-seeking spirit of clarity that you're going to break through and that you're going to grasp. You want to attain Buddhahood in your present form. If you do that, you will. The sixth stage will occur in your life. Sixth stage of practice. The record on page 35, first full paragraph, the record of the orally transmitted teaching says, so now Nichiren says, the purpose of these passages in the commentary, words and phrases, and the sub-commentary on the words and phrases is to explain the arrogance of the 5,000 monks, nuns, laymen, and laywomen who in the assembly who rose from their seats, bowed to the Buddha, and withdrew in chapter 2. You have to understand, I don't know if you remember this, he's just come out of a big samadhi from the Immeasurable Meanings Sutra, okay? And introduction chapter is really just qualifying everybody that's there for this assembly, and they're waiting to see what he came up with from this deep meditation that he had been in. And Manjushri has already said, I think something big is going to happen because the earth is shaken 6 different ways or whatever, okay? That's preceded this chapter 2, Expedient Means, where he's qualifying. Everything I've been saying is true, but it hasn't been the full truth, okay? It's been something to help get you to now be able to understand and perceive the real truth as I'm going to try to explain it. Then he's going to talk about the law, but never name or identify what that law is. Okay, so the record of the orally transmitted, top of page 35, first full paragraph. The record of the orally transmitted teaching says the purpose of these passages in the commentary, words and phrases, Tintai, and sub-commentary on the words and phrases, Miolo, is to explain the arrogance of the 5,000 monks, nuns, laymen, and laywomen in the assembly who rose from their seats, bowed to the Buddha, and withdrew from chapter 2. Because see, don't forget, when he came out of the samadhi and started saying, I have not yet, in the Immeasurable Meaning Sutra, he's already qualified, I have, in these more than 40 years, I have not yet revealed the truth. So when he comes out and he starts talking about, the Buddhism of the Lotus Sutra that he's revealing for the first time, the teaching of the Lotus Sutra that he's revealing for the first time, these 5,000 individuals that were there initially for the assembly said, well, we sat through all of this meditation you did, and now you're coming back, you're just basically saying the same stuff you've been saying. We already know all this, we're leaving. Okay? So that's who they're talking about with these 5,000 arrogant people, because 5,000 people in the assembly that had gathered in the assembly by the introduction chapter all left out of arrogance, all right? You should examine them carefully, okay? Those people that did this. The 2 categories of monks and nuns are persons who have left the household life, and both are said to display overbearing arrogance, to conceal their failings and flaunt their virtues, flaunt their virtues is their basic characteristic. To conceal their failings and flaunt their virtues is their basic characteristic. You must know people like that. I do. The Yupe Saka, or laymen, are men, and their basic characteristic is self-esteem. Arrogant men, that's the reason we all have wars. The Upasika, or lay women, are women, and their basic nature is shamelessness. These 4 kinds of believers are very painful in Japan today. The sutra says that they number 5,000, but in fact in Japan there are 4,994,828 such persons to be seen, which is the whole population of the country at that time. When Shakyamuni Buddha was in the world, 5,000 persons rose from their seats. What we're reading from the sutra there, what's being referred to in the sutra there. When Shakyamuni Buddha was in the world, 5,000 persons rose from their seats and withdrew from the assembly where he was preaching. But now in the latter day of the law, all the living beings in this land of Japan rise from their seats and withdraw from the place where Nichiren is preaching. Okay? He's saying the monks and nuns who display overbearing arrogance, they are priests like Doryu and Ryokan. Are they not? Or are they like the nuns of Kamakura, the laymen, or persons like the lay priest of Saimyo, Hoji Tokiyori? Oh, Tokiyori, sorry, it's in parentheses and I got confused. Hojo Tokiyori. And the laywomen are all the women who, high or low in station, who are lacking in faith, are they not? None of these deem to see their own errors. So he's talking about all the people that are backing up Ryokan and his true word teachings, or his Nimbutsu teachings, Now these people slander Nichiren, and like Doryu and Ryokan. He just specifically mentioned those two, right? Now these people slander Nichiren and his followers, trying to give them an evil name. Are they not those who fail to see their own errors? They are guilty of great slander against the law. Without doubt, they are persons who withdrew from the assembly where the Lotus Sutra is preached. But when they have encountered Nichiren, they may be said, in the words of the sutra, to have bowed to the Buddha and withdrawn, chapter 2. This bowing to the Buddha and withdrawing is a mark of their contempt for him. It is not in any sense the bowing and departing of those who have understanding and belief. This is why the sutra, speaking of such persons, says they are heedless and remiss with regard to the precepts. From volume 4 of Words and Phrases. Volume 4 of Words and Phrases says, in the phrase heedless and remiss with regard to the precepts, the word heedless refers to the errors in the precepts pertaining to the code of conduct, and the word remiss refers to errors in the precepts that accompany meditation and the precepts that accompany the way for emancipation from earthly desires, Buddhahood. These 5,000 arrogant persons are the 5 types of abiding earthly desires that are always part of our makeup. The 5 static kinds of defilement are the static kind based on particular viewpoint, the static kind in attraction or to desire, the static kind in attraction to form, and the static kind in attraction to gestation. The 5 types of abiding earthly desires consist of these, and the static kind based on darkness or ignorance. So, these 5,000 arrogant persons in the middle of page 36 are the 5 types of abiding earthly desires that I just mentioned that are always part of our makeup. So what I just talked about is a fundamental aspect of human life. Okay? It's our deluded mind, copying attitudes, thinking we're smarter than we are, thinking we know what we don't know. He's saying now that I've come and I've introduced Nam-myoho Renge-kyo into all of this, but now when we encounter the Lotus Sutra, and again, when he's talking about encountering the Lotus Sutra, he's talking about encountering his teaching of Nam-myoho Renge-kyo, because the Lotus Sutra has been around for a while at that point, right? Okay, but now when we encounter the Lotus Sutra, again, he says in this explication of the Lotus Sutra, Nichiren's teaching, that whenever in the latter day of the law, whenever the word the sutra was mentioned, or the Lotus Sutra, in the latter day of the law, he's talking about the Daimoku. He's talking about Nam-myoho Renge-kyo. So let me re-paraphrase that. But now when we encounter Nam-myoho Renge-kyo, we awake to the fact that arrogance itself is part of the Dharma realm. Perfect teaching includes everything, right? And so that bowing to the Buddha and withdrawing means that it has departed in the face of the Buddha's authority. The Buddha here is the Buddha realm. That is a part of our nature, and the authority is Nam-myoho Renge-kyo. And he says, in other words, we encounter Nam-myoho Renge-kyo, and that drives out as a superior authority of truth. That drives away this karmically disrespectful behavior. The Buddha here is the Buddha realm, okay? It's the 10th world that is part of our nature. We're all born with the 3,000 realms, right? And his authority, quote unquote, his authority is Nam-myoho Renge-kyo. All the sutras, the authority by which all sutras have been preached by Buddhas that attained Buddhahood through Nam-myoho Renge-kyo. Therefore, when we speak of withdrawing or departing, it refers to a departure that is not a departure. You should think of it as a kind of departure described in the passage at the end of the Universal Worthy chapter that reads, they bowed in obeisance and departed. Because why? Because the Buddha here is the Buddha realm that is part of our nature, and his authority is Nam-myoho Renge-kyo. So even if these people show disrespect to Nam-myoho Renge-kyo, they've made contact with Nam-myoho Renge-kyo. The door has opened. They've heard the name and the words of the truth. So the departure is not a permanent departure. It's a departure that's not really a departure. They've just created the karma to keep coming into contact with the correct teaching over and over and over again until they become Buddhists. All right? You should think of it as a kind of departure described in the passage at the end of the Universal Worthy chapter that reads, "They bowed in obeisance and departed." On the other hand, we may also say that the withdrawal of the 5,000 persons from the assembly signifies that, in fact, there is no withdrawing from the assembly where the Lotus Sutra is preached. Because it's the fundamental nature of our lives as human beings. The reason is that one has already gained enlightenment through the briefly expressed replacement of the three vehicles with the one vehicle that took place with the true aspect of phenomena passage in chapter 2. At that time, it was made clear that as far as self-esteem and overbearing arrogance are concerned, such arrogance itself is part of the Dharma realm, the perfect teaching, and impulse to arrogance is intrinsic to our nature. Pardon me. Okay. At that time, it was made clear that as far as self-esteem and overbearing arrogance are concerned, such arrogance itself is a part of the Dharma nature, the impulse to arrogance that is intrinsic to our nature. The phrase, "the likes of these number 5,000," refers to the 5 types of abiding earthly desires that are at all times a part of our makeup. If we withdraw these 5 types of abiding earthly desires, then the whole meaning of the Lotus Sutra would be lost. If we were without these, I misspoke. If we were without these 5 types of abiding earthly desires, then the whole meaning of the Lotus Sutra would be lost. Why? We would no longer be living beings. We wouldn't go through the process of expressing our Buddhahood in our present form over the course of our lifetime as what seemed like when we first started 9 world entities to reveal the 10th to everybody else. So he's saying if we were without these 5 types of desires, and the desires are considered evil, mind candy to keep you from getting to the ultimate truth, right? But he's saying without those characteristics, then everything that the Lotus Sutra is teaching, even evil people can become and have the Buddha nature. All right, the purpose of the sutra. If you had to purify yourself before you were qualified to take advantage of the sutra, the purpose of the sutra would be lost. That's what he's basically saying. When we realize that these 5 types of abiding earthly desires are an intrinsic, what does that mean? Intrinsic. It means that they're part of us. We can't separate ourselves from it. That's an intrinsic nature. And constantly present part of our nature. It's an intrinsic and constantly present part of our nature. Then we may speak of them as numbering 5,000. And when we do not endeavor to cut off such delusions, but look on these 5 abiding elements just as they are, as constituting an inherent part of the myoho or wonderful law, then it may be said that we fail to see our own errors, because we're simplifying something that is much more complicated than that. Okay, it has to do with the original state. It doesn't have to do with viewing it from a perspective of Shakyamuni's teaching. It has to be viewed from the latter day of the law and Nichiren's teaching. Okay, and if you can't do that, if you want to hang on to what's, over, then that's what means to fail to see your own errors. Because you think you know what you don't know, you're not making yourself available for an expansion of your opportunity in the 9 worlds to become a Buddha in your present form. As to the phrase heedless and remiss with regard to the precepts, this does not refer to the kind of precepts and rules put forth in the Hinayana and provisional teachings, which are designed to cure various sicknesses in human nature. Rather, it refers to the wonderful law embodied in the passage that describes a person who can accept and uphold the Lotus Sutra, saying of such a person that this is what is called observing the precepts. Chapter 11, Treasure Tower. Therefore, the act of being heedless and remiss is in essence, just as it is, the entity referred to in the words, this is what is called observing the precepts. You're alive. You've heard the name and the words of the truth. You're progressing along a path of whether you recognize it or not that's leading you toward enlightenment in your present form in the future. Okay, so he's saying that even if you're being heedless and describes as a person who can accept, words heedless and remiss, even if you're being heedless and remiss, you know what heedless is? Not giving a shit, not paying attention, not caring. And remiss means you don't care what you do being right or wrong. You're just remiss. You just do whatever you want to do. Okay? As right in the middle of page 37, I'll go through it one more time. As to the phrase heedless and remiss with regard to the precepts, following the rules, this does not refer to the kind of precepts and rules put forth previously in the Hinayana and the pre-Lotus Mahayana teachings, which are designed to cure various sicknesses in human nature. Rather, it describes to the wonderful law embodied in the passage that describes the person who can accept and uphold the Lotus Sutra. In other words, they're not excluded just because they were rude and got up and left thinking they know what they don't know. They are included in the perfect teaching. So being heedless and remiss is included in the perfect teaching because ultimately you karmically have already created a link that will carry you back to Nam-myoho Renge Kyo, regardless of what you try to do. Okay? You could be evil and you'll just suffer that suffering, but you will not escape coming back in contact with the law. Once you've opened the door, it can't be closed. It's your original state. Rather, it refers to the wonderful law embodied in the passage that describes a person who can accept and uphold the Lotus Sutra, saying of such a person that this is what is called observing the precepts. That being heedless and remiss is the same as, with the perfect teaching of Nam-myoho Renge Kyo, is the same as being observing the precepts. Therefore, the act of being heedless and remiss is in essence, just as it is, the entity referred to in the words, this is what is called observing the precepts. Doing everything exactly right. Therefore, we see, so you don't have to do anything special or unique or become pure. Okay? You just live your daily life with the desire to advance with your faith in the Gohonzon and chant Nam-myoho Renge Kyo consistently, to have a practice that will allow you to perceive the teaching when you study it. Right? Therefore, since we recognize at the bottom of page 37, this heedlessness and remissness as just as it is part of our basic nature, we may be said in the words of the sutra, okay, therefore, when we recognize this heedless and remissness as just as it is a part of our basic nature, we may be said, in the words of the sutra, to cling to our shortcomings, unwilling to change. From the beginning, these are the wonderful precepts of the one vehicle. In other words, if we're still screwing up and being heedless and remiss, we're not excluded. It's saying very specifically that we're not excluded. But it's also saying we're not getting along with becoming Buddhas in our present form. We're not really taking that part of it seriously. So from the beginning, these are the wonderful precepts of the one vehicle, a vehicle in which the entire Dharma realm is contained in one particle of dust. Our lives contain the entire Dharma realm. Okay? And the 10 directions are all present in a single moment of life. And therefore, we may say with the sutra that these persons of small wisdom have already left. The chaff that the sutra speaks of, each and every speck of dust, each and every phenomena, is the three bodies of the original enlightenment, Therefore, although, as the sutra says, such a person may be of paltry merit and virtue, now they are enlightened, they are the enlightened body of the original and unconditioned enlightenment. So do you understand what that's saying? That's basically saying that even though these people are flawed, even though they're heedless and remiss, they're not. Nothing can change the fact that they're essentially Nam-myoho Renge-kyo. They're manifestations of Nam-myoho Renge-kyo. They're very distorted, full of delusion manifestations of Nam-myoho Renge-kyo. But everything in the Dharma realm is a manifestation of Nam-myoho Renge-kyo. Okay, so therefore, although, as the sutra says, such persons may be of paltry merit and virtue, they are enlightened to the body. They are the enlightened body of original and unconditional enlightenment. Why? Because they're a temporary gathering of the 5 components living in the 9 worlds that possess the 3,000 realms. Okay? Regarding the passage of the sutra that says that these persons are incapable of receiving the law, having heard the substance of the doctrine as it was expounded in the brief replacement of the 3 vehicles by the one vehicle, the passage on the true aspect of phenomena, they attain enlightenment just as they are. In other words, the seed of Buddhahood has been implanted in a fashion that will bring them to awakening at a point sooner than later. Sooner than later. If not in this lifetime, not in like 50 lifetimes or some shit like that, or in eons or kalpas, they will quickly attain the way because of the exposure to hearing the name and the words of the truth. It changes everything. The Venerable Shariputra then asked the Buddha to preach and expound the doctrine with distinctions for the benefit of persons of dull capacity. This refers to the fact that when the extended exposition of the replacement of the 3 vehicles by the one vehicle was delivered, and you remember what that was? Replacement of the 3 vehicles, it's the big white ox cart for the 3 little carts. Okay, it's actually what Buddhahood is being a voice hearer, cause awakened one, and bodhisattva, going through those 3 stages, all right? So, this refers to the fact that when the extended exposition of the replacement of the 3 vehicles by the one vehicle was delivered, these persons were incapable of receiving this law because they already understood it. It was already part of the 3 bodies which they are eternally endowed with. There's nothing they can do to make themselves not qualify. Everything qualifies. Everything actually is already qualified. You have to come to the understanding that you're qualified. That's called Buddhahood. But, in the middle of page 38, but to return to the true meaning of the Lotus Sutra, the substance of the wonderful law knows no distinction between the persons who are capable of receiving the law and the law that is capable of being received. There's no separation between anyone in Nam-myoho Renge-kyo. It is truly a wonderful law that is beyond imagination. And when one proceeds to awaken to its importance, the sutra can declare that this assembly is now free of branches and leaves. This kind of inner awakening, he's talking about Buddhahood now, an awakening to the true aspect in its purity, which is the correct understanding that all things are Nam-myoho Renge-kyo, is the realization that outside of this true aspect, Nam-myoho Renge-kyo, no other phenomena whatsoever exists outside of Nam-myoho Renge-kyo. If Nam-myoho Renge-kyo is not included, nothing exists. It is the basis of everything that exists existing. Therefore, the sutra can say that it is made up only of those steadfast and truthful, because all human beings are. In essence, steadfast and truthful refer to the realization that the body and mind are the wonderful law. Outside of the body and mind, there is no Buddha, is what he's going to declare here. When Nichiren and his followers, at the very bottom of page 38, and we'll stop after point 5, when Nichiren and his followers chant Nam-myoho Renge-kyo, they may say that the company is made up of only those of steadfast and truthful. When Nichiren and his followers chant Nam-myoho Renge-kyo, we may say that the company is made up only of those steadfast and truthful. Those refer to the Buddha of the true aspect of phenomena. Those also refers to the 10 worlds, and steadfast and truthful refers to the realization that the bodies and minds of human beings in the 10 worlds are the wonderful law. And that the word, because again, only in body and mind can the law exist, can it pervade the phenomenal realm. And the word only is applied because such realization is limited to this sutra, the Lotus. The 5,000 arrogant persons are in fact nothing other than the Lotus Sutra. The 5,000 arrogant persons are the 5 elements of which we are made. The 5 elements themselves are Myoho Renge-kyo. Again, the 5,000 arrogant persons represent fundamental darkness, which we all possess fundamental darkness. It's part of the innate original state, right? Hence it is said of them that they bowed to the Buddha and withdrew. This is speaking of persons who withdrew from the 9th consciousness to the 8th consciousness. Okay? They went down a click because they rejected the Lotus Sutra as it was being preached. It didn't mean that they were excluded from being able to utilize the Lotus Sutra or to become enlightened to it, but at that moment, this is speaking of persons who withdrew from the 9th consciousness, the highest realm, to the 8th consciousness, the one where pretty much everybody else goes, and on down to the 6 consciousnesses, which start with form, conception, perception, volition, and mind. That is, those who transmigrate in the realm of birth and death, those who transmigrate in the 6 realms. And when the sutra says that such persons have departed in the face of the Buddha's authority, it is speaking of the teachings that lead to the extinguishing of the sufferings of birth and death and the return to nirvana. Here the authority spoken of, hence the authority spoken of here is Nam-myoho Renge-kyo. This is the total entity of original delusion and original enlightenment. You should give very careful thought to this matter, because our original state includes fundamental darkness, and the original state is Nam-myoho Renge-kyo. Okay, so it must include everything in order to be the perfect teaching. Okay, we'll stop there on page 39 and continue with point 6. Thank you very much.